All right, good morning, people. Bob here back once again. We are prepared again to break down some Bitcoin. Let's get right down to it. So if anybody's been watching the market over the last, hour and a half or so, you've probably been witnessing some destruction here. Really just, I don't know that it was more than an hour ago even that Bitcoin was sitting pretty close to 22.7 and then just dropped off a ledge about 1,300-ish bucks. It was a solid 5% drop in 15 minutes. And we've been talking about it. Look, we're getting what looks to be the double bottom we were looking for. We've talked about it before, where I kind of thought maybe this little gap might be problematic from a weekly standpoint. It didn't matter here. But it makes sense that, after we closed out above this candle, that we needed to come back and retest the top of it at least, which is around 21.5. So here we are. I've been talking about it. I said, man, as long as we don't get rejected at this upper trend line, everything looks pretty good, actually. And up until, again, the last probably 30, 45 minutes, this thing was, in fact, moving up in this direction. Now, the interesting thing about that, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, was that, potentially you get a rejection off of this trend line, and at which point you maybe do cascade down. We don't want to talk about downside targets, but at this point we at least got to spend a few minutes on it, so let's do just that. We got a rejection. 21's coming in here, wants to cross over the 200. Sometimes what happens is it'll come in, you see some initial downsides. That way, again, you pull in some more bears. They're looking for a more lasting downside push. Whereas potentially, as this thing is getting ready to cross, we may actually just see this thing continue to fire off to the upside. Again, just depends. But, at this stage, from a weekly standpoint, assuming that this rejection holds up, then at that stage we may actually have to come back down, and maybe we draw a new trend line here, starting out maybe something like this, where it kind of matches the angle of that weekly move there. So potentially we come down a little bit further. If that's going to be the case, let's just say that we can maybe match up something that's fairly reasonable here. And so if this trend line becomes a reasonable, legitimate trend line, then all of a sudden you've actually potentially got downside into the low 20,000s, 20,400 or so, and that would be a logical place. I mean, super logical. You got 20,560 right here, which is the bottom of these candles, top of this wick. So potentially a number that would make some sense there. And again, it's just funny to see this candle now, because this thing was green, totally green up until a very, very short time ago. It's just kind of interesting to see how quickly things change there. We got up above this level. Now it's a matter of actually holding it. So what would be nice to see is if Bitcoin can find a way to buy it, get bought up to at least this $20,000 or $21,800 level. I just don't know. Looking at it now, and I've been mentioning these three moving averages here for a couple of days now, that at the end of the day, it was going to require a serious move to get above them, and then we didn't want to fall back below them. You can see the 21 down here. It's kind of curling upwards finally on the daily picture. If this trend line is still legitimate, well then at that point we could look and say, all right, yeah, 20,500 seems a very logical location for us to go ahead and see the downside to. But there's a lot going on here. There really just is. I mean, we got, from a pattern standpoint, it's tough to say with any reasonable certainty what we are looking at here, because I could draw this line right here, which would be fairly well represented by this trend line here. At which point it looks like, maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow we come back down to that line and then retest it before potentially another upside bounce. Thing would be that we did get rejected in bullish territory. The bulls couldn't quite take back control. And I guess same thing here. Not a massive surprise given how defensive that's been here. So you've got 1 attempt, 2 attempt, 3 attempts, 4 attempts now to get into the daily bullish territory, and it's just pretty well epically failing each time. Now the problem is that we've got a lower high than this one, and we've got a lower high on the price action, but the high on the RSI is equivalent. So there should be some bearish divergence there, and in fact, we're finally seeing it. When it comes down to it, does this spell doom and gloom? I guess we're going to find out real soon. We talked about this yesterday too, where I readjusted this trend line. It used to be basically where this one is. I moved it and said, well, let's take into account that maybe this was actually price action outside of that. And now you come back up here and you retest this line, which I just re-added this morning, and it sensibly it's getting rejected there. So now do we just fall to here, or is there actually some chance that we come down to that line, fall, and make one more push down into the 18,000s? Because again, we've talked about this before, where falling wedge breakouts, you exit, you come back and you back test, and this is one of those things. Again, we've been talking about it. It's tough to say for sure where we broke out. This was an obvious one, but it's feasible we actually technically broke out here, kind of broke back in a little bit, and then finally got the big push. And we could have said, all right, well, maybe this was our push to the downside after a breakout, but now you've got to look at it and really wonder, does that actually make any sense now? And is it much more likely we are, in fact, coming back down into this range to get a full retest of this? Because this was the obvious breakout, right? We know this one was a breakout. This action, geez, it's just falling apart there. So we'll see. It's none of it's ever a given, but at this point, you got to look for 20,800 is a logical place for Bitcoin to make it all the way down to today. Over the next couple days, maybe realistically 20,300 or so. But this is where we're going to be looking for. This is where we want to see it hold up at, right? We don't want to see it fall back through here. And you've got this trend line and this trend line that would match up right here. There's where we want it to absolutely hold up, 20,400-ish level. Then we've at least got a chance to make another push up here, maybe flip this into support finally, and then make our next move up. And again, you can see, even if it, let's say it played out in kind of the time frame just within what you can see here, and we get like a reasonable time frame. We're still talking, towards the end of the month that all of this could happen. So again, as of right now, tough to say for sure. But this is a pretty stout breakdown right here. We're down 4.5% basically on the day after being up initially, 0.5% maybe or so. Now, there is an interesting aspect to this that I do want to touch on just briefly, that's really in regard to the market cap dominance for Bitcoin. Well, it's interesting because finally Bitcoin dominance is taking over, and Bitcoin had been heading upwards, which was positive, but it leaves the altcoins in the dust a little bit, right? The altcoins will sit there. Even if Bitcoin's moving up, they're not going to do much. Now, the problem is that if Bitcoin continues to pop up here, let's say it breaks through this yellow trend line, that's problematic for the market as a whole, especially if Bitcoin is falling at that point in time. Ideally, Bitcoin is going to get rejected here or here, and then continue its downward trend. This is a daily chart, so if we're looking at that, ideally that's going to happen over the course of the next, say 2-3 days. If we get that to happen, then again, I think it's feasible this does reject, and then we come back down. At that point, it's just a matter of which direction Bitcoin is trending from a price standpoint, right? That's really what this is all going to come down to at this stage now. Now that Bitcoin dominance is not falling any further, right? Like now that it's actually starting a recovery and a pretty stout one at that. You can look back on this one and this was a similar move that it made after a fairly lengthy downside. It kind of did a little pop here, boom, retest, and then a hard pop there, and then it just kind of kept moving up, up, up until it finally got rejected up here. Well, and then again, it just spent 2 months, falling to the downside now. Again, the question just becomes, which direction is Bitcoin actually going to be moving? I would like to think that because Bitcoin dominance is now climbing, again, that simply means that more people are dumping their money into Bitcoin right now than anything else. Now, what we've been dealing with for a while here is, and you guys may remember this, money was flowing into the stable coins significantly for a while there. So Bitcoin dominance was naturally falling because guess what? Everybody was basically putting their money on the sideline. Now you've got all this money flowing back to Bitcoin. So the question becomes, is it flowing back to Bitcoin because the whales believe that it is time to buy it and it actually is going to recover? Or are they just saying, all right, well, now I'm not real sure. I don't really want to go back to stable coins, but I don't want to sit in an altcoin and watch these things get blown up if that's what's going to happen there. So, you've got a few scenarios that could potentially play out in that regard. And then this little pattern here, at the end of the day, this thing's been in a parabolic rise for a while now. It had popped a little hard here, so now it's kind of working its way back down in. I still think, over the course of several days or whatever, as long as this thing, because this has got kind of a scary look to it at the moment. As long as this thing doesn't go ahead and put in one more parabolic move right up out of here, and that's a feasibility. I almost hate to acknowledge that, but that's a feasibility that this thing could come right up in here and put in one more move towards this high over here. And then maybe at that point we're finally moving our way all the way down. But yeah, there's some things that might suggest that we do have some maybe sustained downside. Probably only talking for a handful of days, but still potentially some sustained downside here. And I look at this and I'm kind of coming back over to here, and this is DeFi perp, which is basically an indication as to the entirety of the DeFi market and how it is acting as a whole. Well, it's similar kind of thing. It's in this kind of falling, broadening wedge here. But once we got here, you could make the argument that the rejection is actually going to come in much sooner, and this kind of makes some sense. After looking at some altcoins yesterday, they're kind of you got this higher low, but now these things have to break up or they have to break down. It's one of those things where it's support and resistance. That's really all this comes down to. So you've either got to push up above this resistance and go, and then put in a higher high, or you naturally have to come down and potentially put in a lower low, which, again, as of right now, for all the excitement that we've had over the last few days, that does look like at least a remote feasibility. And similar concept over here. You came up here from a weekly standpoint. You couldn't quite make your way above this. Now you got the 21 coming in. Another retest of the 200 seems like a potentially logical scenario. Unless, again, we just get some fairly immediate push here, and it would need to take place, again, right here at this level. So, Bitcoin and what it decides to do this week is going to be a big deal, obviously, as far as that part goes. If Bitcoin comes back down and retests something around 20,000, you can reasonably assure that the total two, which is basically every crypto except for stable coins and Bitcoin, you can expect this to go ahead and roll back down to the 200 simple on the weekly chart, which, again, another retest there wouldn't be a terrible thing, but it would start to potentially invalidate some of the concepts that we've been looking at here. Because what we just want an outright breakout of this downward trend, right? Which right now it's still feasible. Just a matter of what we're going to get out of it. So let's jump on over here, though. Let's come on back. Let's pull this back up here. So this is our daily chart. Daily looks like absolute terrible crap right this moment. But again, potentially we come down here onto this trend line on the RSI and pop up off of it. That would be the most ideal scenario we could find. Best case scenario after that is we get the bounce here off of this trend line that basically held down all of this price action. So here to here and then here to here, that all falls within something that looks pattern-like. Perhaps we go ahead and we bounce off of that trend line there and then hold up and make another move upside. So again, a few different scenarios that could play out there. What I obviously don't want to see is, right now we're sitting at about a 5% reduction on the day. I really don't want to see something of a 10% reduction. So we basically wipe out this beautiful candle we got here, which seemed like it was going to be a big deal. And now we're, again, we're tanking back down here. So, I guess at this stage, probably going to look, again, 20,800, 20,300. Those are stark feasibilities here in terms of downside for the moment, and it's all happening fairly quickly too. On top of it all, so we shall see. We shall see. Zoom in and on shorter term time frames. Again, you're not going to see anything you're going to like. The 4 hour. We talked about this. It's been sitting up here in overbought territory. Finally, it swung up. It tried to hold this trend line here. Swung up and just absolutely getting pummeled right now. Again, for a solid 5% reduction just in this 4 hour candle, which still has, 2 hours and 45 minutes to go. Not really what you want to see if you were a bull. You at least like to think you might have held this, the 200 simple, but, right now it's really working on losing that. Go ahead and zoom in on the 1 hour. This is the Heikin-Ashi versus the regular candles. This I've kind of measured out a few different ways, and if we assume that this particular pattern is right, we're already basically at a measured move. So potentially we look for some level of rebound back up off of that level, especially given that Bitcoin is already oversold on the hourly, but. It's interesting how you can just kind of follow along here and kind of see the story as it's playing out. You had this uptrend, you lost it, you come back down, you back tested it, still managed to put in a higher high than over here, but that's where the bearish divergence came in, and then finally it said, you know what, nope, this rejection is the one that's going to send us way down, and here we are. So again, at this point, there are several places I could look at this and say would make sense to find some support. Ideally, again, we're going to come down here, come back up, put in a positive retest at 21,560 and continue our upside. On the flip side of that, we come down to one of these levels here, 20,600, 20,300, 20,000 even. We come down here and bounce off of one of those levels. So there, again, a lot of things that could happen here. And again, it's just all about support and resistance. We've got all this support in this level, support here, support here, support here. And then we're just looking to see which one of these support levels is going to hold up. Again, I don't realistically expect that we're going to see a 10% downside day, but is it feasible? Sure. And if it happens, well, obviously we're already down 5%. Where's 5% more? And that's going to put us right in that level, which again is a level that I think is realistic. Very unfortunate is what I would say to that. So, I mean that's pretty much where we're at today. Here we're right now we're just looking at some downside targets unless Bitcoin makes a ridiculous recovery right here and just flies up off of some of these levels. But right now that just doesn't look like it's a realistic scenario. I got this one right now on a 1 minute chart just so you can kind of every now and again it's nice just to kind of see the price action as it's playing out, like real live, full lifetime. And you can already see here that it does kind of want to hold this 21.4 level. And, so, potentially we come back all the way up here and actually put in, over the course of maybe a few hours, but, actually potentially come back in and put in a potentially bearish retest at any of these upside levels here, something here, maybe here. So we are going to see some upside today, but I'm assuming we saw the high for the day when it hit 22.8 or so. That's more than likely the high for the day, and now it's just a matter of where can we recover up to before the day is out, to at least make this thing look halfway respectable. Now I guess just to that point, maybe just one more daily chart look. If we can come back up and close out the day up here, which I don't know, it's only $400 away, so it's not impossible. It just doesn't look great. But if we can come back up and close here today, well, all of a sudden we've still maintained support at this level, or at least found support at that level, which could then result in, again, another daily green candle, which, hey, that none of us is going to say no to that, because I think that if we did get another daily green candle here, it probably does pop up all the way to, say, 23,000. And then, potentially another nasty rejection. So we're going to see. We'll be monitoring it today. Downside, and I don't think it's going to be today, but 20,400-ish downside over the next 48 hours. Potential for a move up to, say, 23,000 and change over the next 48 hours. And it's all just a matter of how it all reacts to these levels that we are now working on losing again. So, man, it's excitement out there still, whether it's up, down, sideways, whatever. There's always excitement to be had out here in this market. I'm going to go ahead, sign off now, get back to trying to find us the big winners. And, hey, we appreciate you guys as always. Looking forward to catching up tomorrow. See you then.